Some mornings you brush your hair just like any other day, but when the bathroom light hits just right, something makes you pause. It's not exactly the gray, not the lines around your eyes. It's the feeling that the hair, which once made you feel alive, now feels like an old habit, no longer reflecting who you are. You don't want to be 30 again. You're not looking for someone to say, "You look young." You just want, when you look in the mirror, to see that light again, even if it's soft still there in your own eyes. And sometimes, that doesn't come from a haircut or a wave. It comes from the right shade. Placed gently, at the right moment in your life. There are 3 hair colors that have helped thousands of women over 60 restore the natural radiance in their face without anyone noticing they changed a thing. They don't make you someone else, but they can bring you back to yourself. 1. Strawberry blonde. Eleanor was never the kind of woman who sought adventure with her hair. For nearly 25 years, she stuck with a deep neutral brown, not too light, not too dark, never bold. It was the color her husband once called stable, and it became the tone that made her feel composed amidst the ever-changing demands of work, family, and even her own aging. Each time she visited the salon, Eleanor repeated the same phrase, "just like last time," not because she loved it, but because at her age, safety felt like its own kind of peace. And perhaps it would have stayed that way, if not for a single photograph. It was her granddaughter's 5th birthday. The whole family gathered in the backyard beneath strings of golden lights hanging across the old oak trees. Eleanor wore her favorite cream linen dress, tiny pearl earrings, and her hair combed neatly, just like always. The photo was snapped just as everyone laughed at the little girl smearing cake all over her dad's face. But when the picture was printed and Eleanor saw herself in that golden, joyful scene, something felt off. The entire image was soaked in sunlight, bright faces, glowing eyes, skin reflecting something warm from within. Except Eleanor. She looked pulled into the background, not because of wrinkles, not because of posture, but because of that deep brown hair set against the warm blondes, the golds, the honey tones. It dragged the light out of her face, made her features seem heavier, her cheekbones duller. She tucked the photo into a drawer, but it didn't leave her mind. The next week, she sat in front of the mirror, staring longer than usual. Her eyes were still lively. Her skin, though freckled with age, still carried a hint of brightness along the bridge of her nose. What made her reflection seem tired wasn't time. It was the hair color for older women, the one she'd always believed was not worth changing. At a newly opened salon, a young stylist gently asked, "Would you like to try a slightly lighter tone? Just a bit brighter, not to make you look different, but to help you see yourself more clearly." Eleanor was startled. No one had ever said that to her before. The stylist suggested a shade of strawberry blonde, not a loud blonde, not a flashy red, but a gentle mix of berry warmth and soft sunlight. "This color doesn't push you to look younger," she said. "It just brings light back to your face." Eleanor hesitated. Then, almost instinctively, she nodded. Maybe because for once she didn't need to change for anyone else. 3 hours later, sitting back at the mirror, Eleanor didn't see a stranger. She didn't even see someone who looked 10 years younger, like the magazines promised. But the light had returned. Around her cheeks, once shadowed by dark strands, now glowed with a natural pink. Her eyes looked clearer. And something soft traced from her temples to her chin like a stream of light that had wandered off and finally found its way back home. Since that day at the salon, Eleanor hasn't dyed her hair again. That hair color for older women, that soft strawberry blonde, fades slowly. Each morning, when she brushes her hair, she no longer checks the shade or split ends. She simply looks in the mirror, tilts her head slightly, and smiles. Not because someone might notice her new hair, but because in that quiet moment, she finally noticed herself. Some changes don't need to be loud. They just need to be enough to remind us that there is still light. We just forgot to open the door and let it in. Up next is another story about honey-toned hair and a woman who didn't want a color that shouted, but one that whispered a kind of softness no words could hold. 2. Honey Balayage. Janice lived in a small Midwest town where every road seemed to lead back to the same bookstore tucked on the corner of Main Street. For nearly 40 years, she had walked into that store every week, not just to buy books, but to feel like she still had a thread tying her to the world. Since her husband passed, that routine became more sacred than ever. But people started to notice Janice walking slower. Her hair had grown long, more silver now, often left down and no longer tied up like before. There was a stillness about her, something quieter, heavier, not quite sadness, but certainly a dimming of the light that once danced around her. One early autumn afternoon, when the scent of dry leaves floated between rows of shedding trees, she ran into an old friend at the bookstore. Their conversation was brief, but as they parted, the friend gently touched Janice's shoulder and said, "Just let the light touch your face a little." It wasn't advice, just a whisper, but it stayed with Janice long after. The following week, she stepped into the same old salon she and her husband once visited. A young stylist, someone Janice had never met, welcomed her with an unhurried smile. After quietly studying Janice's long silver hair, she said, "If you don't want to cut it, and you're not ready for a bold color, there's a soft way. Just a few honey pieces around the face. We won't change the base. Just help your reflection catch the light a bit better." Janice had never heard anyone describe hair color for older women as a form of light. But maybe that's why she listened. And, for the first time in years, she sat in the salon chair without giving directions. She stayed still, letting expert hands choose the strands that would begin retelling her story. Honey balayage, not the harsh contrast of classic highlights, but hand-painted strokes of tone across the hair, like late-day sunlight shimmering across a lake. The honey shade, neither brassy nor cool, melded with her silver hair to create soft glimmers of warmth. Her natural roots remained untouched. Only the areas around her cheekbones and jawline were kissed with brightness, so that when light fell upon them, her face seemed subtly lifted without anything being forced. After that appointment, Janice didn't feel transformed, but something curious happened. People at the bookstore began greeting her first, with warmer tones in their voices. A little boy reading comic books whispered to his mom, "She looks like a fairy with golden hair." And one quiet afternoon, as Janice stood in the self-help section, her fingers reached for a lemon-yellow book cover, a color she once avoided just because it made her feel comforted. The soft hair color for older women didn't make her look 10 years younger, but it gave her eyes a reason to linger longer in the mirror. It made the lines around her lips feel less like boundaries and more like brushstrokes from a life well lived. And perhaps what Janice loved most about the color was that she never had to explain it. No one asked, "Did you do your hair?" And they simply said, "You look radiant today." Sometimes what we need isn't transformation. It's a quiet hand guiding light back to where it always belonged. And in that gentle return, we remember we never truly faded. We just stopped letting ourselves shine. Up ahead is another journey, a woman who stopped coloring her hair to cover the gray, and instead walked beside it, embracing a kind of beauty that time could never define. 3. Silver gray. Mary was the first in her friend group to notice gray hair. She was just past 50 then. One strand, then another. And by the end of that winter, the temples near her face shimmered like tiny shards of mirror catching stubborn light. But rather than let it spread, she chose control. For the next 10 years, Mary lived in a 4-week rhythm, booking appointments, donning the cape, washing, mixing dye, waiting, rinsing, blow-drying. The smell of ammonia became something she could identify even in unfamiliar salons. Every time she looked in the mirror, she scanned her hairline, like searching for evidence of something wrong. Until that day. She was sitting in her usual salon, head bowed slightly, waiting for her turn as always. Her hands clutched the chair's armrests, her mind going through a grocery list. But amid the harsh scent of chemicals and the roar of dryers, she caught her reflection in the large mirror across from her, not her face, but her posture. A posture that wasn't relaxed. Not because she was tired, but because she had become so used to holding it together. And suddenly, she felt exhausted. Not from age, but from the pressure of constantly proving to herself that she was still okay, still young, still not ready to let go. For the first time, Mary stood up and said, "I'm not coloring it anymore." The stylist paused, confused, but Mary meant it. It wasn't about letting her gray run wild. It was about stepping out of that endless loop, choosing a look not to hide, but to claim her presence. Not long after, she sought out a hair color specialist who worked specifically with natural gray transitions. They didn't call it the last resort. They called it the opening chapter. Silver gray isn't just plain gray. It's an artful mix of cool tones, bright silver, soft ash, and muted platinum strategically layered over her natural base. When done right, it doesn't make a woman look older. It makes the face appear brighter, cleaner, almost translucent. It brings attention to the eyes, softens the jawline, and best of all, it doesn't demand to be maintained. Its essence is evolution. Mary didn't change everything in one go. The process took over 3 months, layer by layer, section by section, stage by stage. But each morning, she saw the light shifting in the mirror. The once scattered grays started to take form. Her hair was no longer a zone invaded by time, but the centerpiece where every gaze paused. At her 45th high school reunion, Mary wore a cool charcoal silk blouse with an open neckline, no jewelry, no lipstick, no dye. Yet her old classmates, some former cosmetic surgeons, others university professors, stared at her in a long, quiet moment. Then one of them whispered, "You look the most like yourself out of all of us." Mary smiled, not for the compliment, but because she knew they were right. Not everyone is ready to walk alongside time. But when we stop pretending not to age, that's when true radiance finally has the room to bloom. And if someday that radiance still feels faint, perhaps all you need is a touch of warm light placed gently just enough to lift your entire face without anyone knowing what changed. 4. French Butter Blonde. Linda was never afraid of change. She had traveled solo to Florence at 55, changed careers 3 times, and taught herself photography once her children were grown. But when it came to her hair, she always chose to follow advice. When her daughter suggested, "Mom, you should try platinum highlights. It'll brighten your skin," Linda nodded without much thought. Partly because she trusted her daughter, partly because she hoped the lighter hair would bring a glow to her face, just like the magazines promised. The first time she stepped out of the salon, her hair shimmered almost white. It felt unfamiliar, but she thought, maybe I just need to get used to it. Yet, just weeks later, those platinum strands turned dry and brassy. Her hair felt rougher. Already fine in texture, it now seemed even more fragile. Linda went back to the salon, and then again. Each touch-up made her hair a bit thinner, her gaze a little more uncertain. The style mistakes after 60 that no one talks about, the pursuit of youthful tones that never quite fit, began to show not in color, but in the strain of trying to keep up with something never meant for her. It wasn't until a small workshop on caring for thinning hair after 60 that Linda heard something that made her pause. A color expert said, "Don't go brighter. Go warmer. Color doesn't need to be loud to lift the face. Sometimes the right warmth softens us in ways nothing else can." French Butter Blonde, a name that sounded like a whisper, wasn't the glitzy gold of a 20-year-old's summer hair. It was a gentle shade, blending pale beige with a hint of caramel, not flashy, not cold. This tone acts like a layer of morning light settled across the temples, where facial definition begins to soften with age. It doesn't youthify, it soothes. Like the way late afternoon sunlight makes a face look rested, no matter how many smile lines it holds. Linda said yes. But this time there was no makeover, no dramatic reveal. No loud blow dryers, no harsh spotlights. Her hair was sectioned gently into fine parts, with highlights placed only where needed, around the eyes, above the cheekbones, along the natural part, so the light could land there like drops of honey. When it was done, Linda looked in the mirror. Her face hadn't changed, but it looked as if someone had softly wiped away a thin fog. It was still Linda, but lighter, more alive, and strangely at peace. A few days later, while checking out at the neighborhood grocery store she'd visited since 1997, the cashier smiled brightly and asked, "Got something special going on today?" "You look radiant," Linda smiled back and said, "I just decided to be a little gentler." She wasn't talking about her hair. She didn't have to. That hair color for older women didn't demand attention. It simply invited people to look a little closer. And for the first time in years, Linda picked a butter-colored blouse to wear on a quiet Sunday morning. A color she once believed would wash her out now made her entire face glow. Not because of the blouse, but because her face had found its own light again. It's not boldness that makes us memorable. It's when something small lets us see ourselves again, without having to explain. But for women who once wore brilliant red hair, there's something even harder than dyeing again. It's accepting that they've changed and choosing a new way to shine. 5. Ginger Glow Up. Judith never dyed her hair to chase trends. She had been born with naturally red hair, a rich copper shade that, when sunlight hit it, almost lit up like fire. Back in college, Judith only had to tie her hair up and smile, and the whole room seemed to brighten just a little. Everyone could spot her from a distance because that hair-bold, warm, unapologetically present was as much a part of her as her laughter. But time, as always, did its work. The red didn't vanish overnight. It faded like a silk scarf washed too many times, from vivid orange to soft brown, and eventually settling into a dull, lifeless copper that no longer reflected light. Judith didn't hate her hair, it just no longer helped her recognize herself. She wasn't trying to hold on to her youth. She didn't need that. But one afternoon, while sorting through old photos with her granddaughter, photos of summers by the lake, outdoor concerts, and head-thrown-back laughter in the sun, she paused. Not out of nostalgia, but because something in those strands of old light reminded her just how fully she once lived. She realized she didn't want to go back, but she longed to bring a little of that light forward with her into who she had become. This time, she didn't choose to dye at all. No bold red, no attempt to force her way back into a past that no longer fit. She walked into the salon, pulled out her phone, and showed a candid photo from 1982's sun breaking across her hair like honeyed fire. Then she said, "I want this feeling again, but for the 69-year-old woman I am now." The stylist took a path far from traditional dye jobs. No bleach, no heavy-handed pigment. Just a demi-permanent gloss, a soft, sheer layer of tone that wouldn't damage her hair or leave a harsh regrowth line. The chosen tone? Ginger Glow, a gentle, luminous copper that shimmered like sunlight slipping through a glass of honeyed tea. When the light touched her hair, it didn't change color. It spoke. The process took just over an hour. But when Judith stepped out onto the small-town street, the wind lifted her hair into the slanting afternoon sun, and people turned, not in surprise, but as if something quietly alive had passed by. She didn't feel younger, but she felt present again. As if for years she had been living on mute. And now the first note had returned. Her granddaughter, watching from the back seat, stared for a few silent moments before saying, "Grandma, your hair looks like it's glowing." Judith turned, smiled, and said nothing. But inside her, something stirred, a joy she thought had long faded, the happiness of not needing to stand out, but still shining in a way that belonged entirely to this season of life. Some beauty isn't found in the mirror. It lives in the way you walk into a room and don't have to do a thing because you know you're carrying the light with you. Because sometimes what helps a woman look younger after 50 isn't the color itself, but choosing a color that makes her feel vivid again, not for others to notice, but so she can recognize herself first. Maybe no one else will notice it, but you will. That today, when your fingers brushed through your hair, it felt softer, lighter, and somehow more true. Not because of a dramatic change, but simply because, for the first time, you styled it not to hide, but to show up. Gently, just enough for you to recognize yourself in the mirror without trying. If anything in this video made you pause even just for a second, leave me a number below to let me know you're walking this path too. A 0 if you haven't tried anything yet. A 1 if you've ever made a change, even a small one. Just one number. I'll read it, and I'll understand. And if you're somewhere in between, wanting to hold on, but also wondering what it might feel like to try something new, what would you like me to share next? Would you like a video about haircuts that brighten your face without going short? Or one about hair colors that make your eyes look clearer when you catch yourself in the mirror each morning? If something here made you want to see me again, you can click follow. Not to stay updated, but so that maybe someday, when you're ready, we'll meet again. right at the moment you need it most.